blood on the locker room floor was still warm when they found the note. God hates. It began, the slur that followed written in what looked like David's own hand. But here's what the police didn't know yet. David Chun would never have written those words. Not because he was too good, but because he was left-handed. And this note, it was written by someone who was right-handed. At Ridgewater University, two young men had climbed higher than anyone expected them to. Marcus Thompson and David Chun weren't just basketball stars. They were breaking barriers, changing minds, and building bridges at the small Christian college. They were scholars, leaders, and deeply faithful young men who carried the hopes of their families and their community. But when they benched a bitter teammate, someone they considered a brother, everything changed. What began as jealousy turned into something far more sinister, a calculated campaign that would weaponize society's darkest prejudices against them. False rumors, staged hate, and chilling lies planted like seeds across campus. And when their bodies were found, one in his dorm, the other in a blood-soaked locker room, the school was quick to blame outside hate. But the truth was worse. This wasn't a hate crime from strangers. It was murder orchestrated by someone they trusted. Someone who shared their struggles, their dreams, their faith. Someone who looked just like them but whose heart had turned poisonous with envy. The killer didn't just want them dead. He wanted them remembered as everything they weren't, as a lie that would outlive the truth. They weren't murdered for being gay. They weren't gay. They were murdered for being better than someone who couldn't accept being second best. And their killer almost got away with it.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Before we begin, I need you to understand something. Marcus Thompson and David Chun were real human beings with real families who loved them. Their mothers still wake up every morning missing their sons. Their fathers still wonder what they could have done differently. Their siblings still save their phone numbers in their contacts, unable to delete them. This story isn't entertainment. It's a tragedy that destroyed lives, shattered families, and robbed the world of two young men who could have changed everything. So please listen with respect, because Marcus and David deserved better than they got, and their truth deserves to be remembered. The last video call between Marcus Thompson and his mother took place on March 15th at 11:47 p.m. Denise Thompson, working the night shift at Cleveland General Hospital, had called her son during her break to check on him before his team's biggest game of the season. "Baby, you look tired," she said, studying his face on her phone screen. "You been sleeping?" Marcus forced a smile for his mother's sake, but the exhaustion was evident in his eyes. "I'm okay, Mama. Just focused on tomorrow's game." What he didn't tell her was that he'd been getting death threats for 3 weeks. Anonymous notes slipped under his dorm room door, text messages from unknown numbers, emails with subject lines that made his stomach turn. All because someone had started a rumor that he and his teammate David were more than friends. "You remember what Grandmama always said?" Denise reminded him. "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." "I remember," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "I love you, baby. Play your heart out tomorrow." "I love you too, Mama." Those were the last words Denise Thompson would ever hear from her eldest son. 600 miles away in Atlanta, David Chun was having a similar conversation with his father, Jerome, who was calling from his night shift at the auto repair shop. "You sure you're all right, son? You sound different." David was sitting in his dorm room, staring at the latest threatening note that had appeared under his door. This one was more specific than the others, mentioning details about his life that only someone close to the team would know. "I'm fine, Dad. Just pre-game nerves. Remember what I taught you about pressure? It either makes diamonds or breaks pipes. You're a diamond, son." "I know, Dad. I love you. Love you too. Make us proud tomorrow." Those would be the last words Jerome Chun would ever speak to his boy. Neither family knew that as their son said goodnight, a killer was already putting the final touches on a plan that had been months in the making. A plan so twisted, so calculated, that it would fool police, media, and an entire nation into believing something that was never true. The truth about what happened to Marcus Thompson and David Chun wouldn't emerge for 18 months. And when it did, it would shatter everything people thought they knew about friendship, loyalty, and the depths of human jealousy. Marcus Thompson and David Chun had met on the first day of practice their freshman year at Ridgewater University. Two young men from different worlds brought together by their shared love of basketball and faith. Marcus, from Cleveland's East Side, was the son of a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and dreams alive in her children's hearts. At 6 feet 4 inches with a lean, athletic build and a jump shot that seemed guided by divine intervention, Marcus had been recruited by several major programs. But he'd chosen Ridgewater for reasons that had nothing to do with basketball. "I want to be more than just a player," he told Coach Bill Richardson during his recruitment visit. "I want to be a leader, a role model. I want to show kids like me that there's more than one path to success." David, half black and half Korean, had grown up in Atlanta navigating the complexities of mixed-race identity while excelling both academically and athletically. At 5 feet 11 inches with lightning-quick reflexes and court vision that bordered on supernatural, David could have played at any number of prestigious programs. But like Marcus, he'd been drawn to Ridgewater's emphasis on character development alongside athletic achievement. "Basketball is temporary," David had explained to his parents when he announced his decision. "But the man I become here, that's forever." By their sophomore year, Marcus and David had transformed Ridgewater from a basketball afterthought into a legitimate contender. Marcus averaged 24 points and 9 rebounds per game while shooting 46% from three-point range. David orchestrated the offense with precision, averaging 18 points and 11 assists, while turning the ball over less than any player in conference history. More importantly, they'd become best friends brothers, really united by their faith, their ambition, and their understanding of what it meant to carry the hopes of others on their shoulders. They roomed together, studied together, attended Bible study together, and spent countless hours talking about their dreams beyond basketball. Marcus wanted to become a lawyer, fighting for social justice. David planned to start a nonprofit organization providing educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. They were everything college athletics claimed to represent scholar athletes who understood that their platform came with responsibility.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
But to someone watching from the bench, their success looked like theft. Jamal Stevens had arrived at Ridgewater the same year as Marcus and David, a 6 feet 2 inches guard from Detroit with solid fundamentals and a fierce work ethic. For most of their freshman year, the three had been inseparable, eating meals together, hanging out in each other's rooms, forming the kind of bond that young men away from home for the first time often create. Jamal had grown up in circumstances similar to Marcus's: single mother, financial struggles, basketball as a potential ticket to a better life. He understood the weight of being the first in his family to attend college, the pressure to succeed not just for himself but for everyone who'd sacrificed to get him there. During their freshman season, Jamal had been a key contributor, starting several games and averaging 12 points per game. The future looked bright for all three young men. But by sophomore year, everything had changed. While Marcus and David's games had evolved to elite levels, Jamal's had plateaued. He found himself coming off the bench more often, his playing time decreasing as his former roommates became stars. The easy camaraderie they'd once shared became strained as Jamal struggled with feelings he didn't want to acknowledge. It wasn't just basketball. Marcus and David's academic success, their leadership roles on campus, their growing media attention, everything Jamal had once dreamed of having seemed to flow effortlessly to his former friends. The breaking point came in February of their sophomore year, when Coach Richardson made a decision that would set everything in motion. "Stevens," Richardson said after a particularly disappointing practice performance, "I'm moving you to the scout team for the rest of the season." The scout team, essentially the practice squad, made up of players who wouldn't see meaningful game time. For someone who'd started games as a freshman, it was a devastating demotion. Jamal's teammates tried to console him, with Marcus and David being especially supportive. "It's temporary, man," Marcus had said. "Keep working, Keep your head up. Your time will come." But Jamal heard something else in those words, pity. And pity from people who had everything he wanted was more than he could bear. That night, alone in his new single room, he'd moved out of the room he'd shared with David earlier in the semester. Jamal Stevens made a decision that would ultimately destroy 4 lives. If he couldn't have the success, the recognition, the love that Marcus and David enjoyed, he would make sure they couldn't have it either. The plan didn't come to Jamal all at once. It started as a fantasy, the kind of dark thoughts that people have in their worst moments but never act upon. What if Marcus and David weren't the golden boys everyone thought they were? What if there was something about them that would make people turn away? What if their perfect image could be shattered by the right rumor, the right insinuation, the right lie told often enough to become truth? Jamal knew his former friends well enough to understand their vulnerabilities. Both were deeply religious, attending a conservative Christian university where certain behaviors were not just frowned upon but explicitly forbidden. Both came from traditional families with strong moral expectations. Both were intensely private about their personal lives. And both were so close, so inseparable, that it wouldn't take much to make people wonder about the nature of their relationship. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Jamal wouldn't have to actually prove anything. He'd just have to plant seeds of doubt and let other people's prejudices do the rest. It started with casual comments in the dorm. "Have you noticed how Marcus and David are always together? Like always. Kind of makes you wonder, you know? I walked by their room last night and heard them talking really quietly. Seemed pretty intimate for just friends. I'm not saying anything, but when's the last time either of them talked about girls? I mean, we're college guys. It's kind of weird, right?" The comments were always followed by quick disclaimers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, or "I'm probably just imagining things," designed to make them seem like innocent observations rather than deliberate attempts to spread rumors. Within weeks, the whispers had taken on a life of their own. Other students began watching Marcus and David more closely, looking for signs that confirmed what they'd begun to suspect. Their close friendship, which had once been admired, suddenly seemed suspicious. Their shared room, their constant companionship, their lack of public romantic relationships, all of it became evidence of something that existed only in the imagination of people who wanted to believe the worst. But Jamal wasn't satisfied with just campus gossip. He wanted something bigger, something that would destroy Marcus and David completely. So he began to escalate. The first note appeared under Marcus's door on February 28th, written in block letters that couldn't be traced. "We know what you are. Ridgewater is a Christian school. Perverts like you don't belong here." Marcus's hands shook as he read it. He'd faced prejudice before, but nothing this direct, this threatening. He folded the note and put it in his desk drawer, unsure what to do with it. 3 days later, David found an identical note under his door. The notes continued throughout March, growing more specific and more threatening. "Your sick relationship is an abomination. God hates what you are doing. Transfer somewhere else before something bad happens." Marcus and David shared the notes with each other but told no one else. They were afraid of drawing more attention to themselves, afraid of validating rumors that weren't true, afraid of disappointing their families and their coach. Jamal watched their growing paranoia with satisfaction. He varied his handwriting, used different pens, even had a few notes delivered by unwitting accomplices who thought they were helping expose something real. But the notes were just the beginning. Jamal started vandalizing their dorm room doors with slurs, then calling security himself to report the hate crimes. He created fake social media accounts to spread rumors online. He even called local reporters with tips about discrimination at Ridgewater University. Each incident made Marcus and David more isolated, more fearful, more convinced that the entire campus had turned against them for something they weren't even guilty of. The psychological warfare was working perfectly. But Jamal had one more card to play, one that would make the entire country believe his lies were truth. On March 16th, the day after their final regular season game, Jamal Stevens put the last phase of his plan into motion. He'd spent weeks perfecting the audio recording that would serve as evidence of Marcus and David's relationship. Using sophisticated editing software and hours of recorded conversations from team meetings and casual interactions, Jamal had created what sounded like an intimate conversation between his former friends. The recording wasn't explicit, but it was suggestive enough to confirm what people had already been led to believe. Taken out of context and carefully edited, innocent comments about their friendship had been made to sound like something else entirely. Jamal uploaded the recording to an anonymous file-sharing site and sent the link to several campus news outlets, along with a message claiming to be from a concerned student who thought the university should know about the inappropriate relationship between two of its star players. By that evening, the story had exploded across social media. Recording exposes Ridgewater basketball stars, read the headline on the campus blog. Audio evidence of inappropriate relationship, said another. The recording was played thousands of times, dissected by amateur analysts, and used as proof positive that everything people had been whispering about was true. Marcus and David were devastated. They recognized their own voices but couldn't understand how their words had been twisted into something unrecognizable. They tried to explain that the recording was fake, that their conversations had been taken out of context, but no one believed them. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to frame them for something they weren't guilty of? The answer was sitting in the common room of their dorm, watching the news coverage with an expression of perfectly crafted shock and sympathy. "I can't believe this," Jamal said to anyone who would listen. "Marcus and David are my friends. This is just, I don't know what to think." But behind his mask of concern, Jamal Stevens was already planning the final act of his campaign. The act that would end with two young men dead and himself positioned as the grieving friend who'd tried to save them. The week following the release of the audio recording was hell for Marcus Thompson and David Chun. Death threats poured in from around the country. Religious groups denounced them as sinners corrupting Christian values. Alumni called for their expulsion. Protesters gathered outside the campus gates with signs declaring, "God hates perverts," and Ridgewater supports sin. Coach Richardson tried to support his players, insisting that their personal lives were irrelevant to their value as athletes and young men. But the pressure from the university administration, the board of trustees, and major donors was enormous. "Maybe it would be better if they transferred," suggested the university president during a closed-door meeting. "Just until this blows over." "Absolutely not," Richardson replied. "These boys have done nothing wrong. I won't abandon them because of rumors and gossip." But even Richardson was beginning to have doubts, not about Marcus and David's character, but about whether they could survive the onslaught of hatred directed at them. Marcus and David, meanwhile, were falling apart under the pressure. They'd stopped eating in the dining hall to avoid the stares and whispers. They'd quit attending campus events where they'd once been welcome. They'd even stopped attending their beloved Bible study group, unable to face the judgment of people they'd considered friends. "Maybe we should just transfer," David said one evening as they sat in their room, surrounded by hate mail and death threats. "Start over somewhere else." "And let them win?" Marcus replied bitterly. "Let them drive us away from everything we've worked for? What's the point of staying if everyone believes we're something we're not?" It was the kind of conversation that Jamal Stevens had been hoping they'd have. The conversation that showed how broken they'd become, how ready they were for the final push that would end everything. On March 22nd, Jamal made that final push. The text message came to both Marcus and David at 11:30 p.m. on March 22nd, from a number they didn't recognize. "I know who's been sending the notes and spreading the rumors. Meet me in the gym at midnight if you want to know the truth. Come alone. Trust me." Marcus and David showed each other the identical messages, their hearts racing with a mixture of hope and fear. After weeks of torment, someone was finally offering them answers. They should have told Coach Richardson. They should have called campus security. They should have done a dozen things differently. Instead, they walked across campus in the cold March night, desperate for any information that might help them reclaim their lives. The gymnasium was dark except for a few security lights, casting long shadows across the empty court where Marcus and David had shared so many moments of triumph. They called out, looking for whoever had summoned them, but received no response. "Maybe this was a mistake," David whispered. That's when they heard footsteps echoing from the locker room. "In here," called a voice they recognized but couldn't quite place. Marcus and David looked at each other, then walked toward the locker room, still believing they were about to meet someone who wanted to help them. Instead, they walked into a carefully planned ambush.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Jamal Stevens was waiting in the locker room with a baseball bat and a knife, weapons he'd stolen from the athletic equipment storage weeks earlier in preparation for this moment. "Jamal," Marcus said in confusion as his former friend stepped out of the shadows. "What are you doing here? Did you send those texts?" "I sent the texts," Jamal replied, his voice strangely calm. "I sent the notes. I made the recording. I did all of it." David stared at him in disbelief. "You? But why? We're friends. We're brothers." "Brothers?" Jamal laughed bitterly. "Brothers don't steal each other's dreams. Brothers don't take everything that should have been shared." "We never took anything from you," Marcus said, taking a step forward. "Stop!" Jamal raised the bat threateningly. "Don't come any closer. Don't pretend you don't know what you did to me." "Jamal, man, whatever this is about, we can work it out," David said, his voice shaking. "Put the bat down and let's talk." "Talk?" Jamal's voice rose to a shout. "Like you talked to Coach Richardson about my attitude problems? Like you talked to the professors about my academic struggles? Like you talked to everyone about how much better you are than me?" Marcus and David exchanged confused glances. They'd never spoken to anyone about Jamal except to express concern for a friend who seemed to be struggling. "We never said anything bad about you," Marcus said quietly. "We've only tried to help." "Your help was pity," Jamal spat. "Your help was a reminder that I'm not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough to stand next to you." The rage in his voice was terrifying, but underneath it was something even worse, pain so deep and poisonous that it had transformed a decent young man into a monster. "So I decided to show everyone who you really are," Jamal continued. "To tear down the pedestals everyone put you on. To make you feel as worthless as you made me feel. The rumors, the harassment, that was you trying to help us?" David asked incredulously. "That was me trying to destroy you," Jamal corrected. "And it worked, didn't it? Look at you, broken, hated, afraid, just like I've been for months." Marcus took another step forward, his hands raised peacefully. "Jamal, you're our friend. We love you, man. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it." "No," Jamal said, gripping the bat tighter. "It's too late for that. You destroyed my life, so I'm going to destroy yours. Permanently." What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the bat. Jamal swung with all his strength, the aluminum connecting with Marcus's skull with a sickening crack. Marcus collapsed to the floor, blood immediately pooling around his head. David screamed and dropped to his knees beside his best friend, pressing his hands against the wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. Marcus, stay with me." But Marcus's eyes were already glassy, unfocused. The blow had been fatal. Jamal stood over them both, breathing heavily, the bat still in his hands. "You killed him?" David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You killed Marcus." "No," Jamal said coldly. "You killed him. You and your perverted relationship. That's what everyone's going to believe." David looked up at his former friend in horror as he realized this had all been planned. "You're going to stage this," he said. "You're going to make it look like a murder-suicide," Jamal confirmed. "Driven to desperation by the harassment and hatred you've been facing. It's actually quite poetic. Your lie becomes your legacy." David tried to run, but Jamal was faster. The knife went into David's back first, then his chest, then his throat as he fought desperately for his life. When it was over, Jamal Stevens stood alone in a locker room painted with the blood of two young men who'd done nothing more than be better than him at basketball. Now came the hardest part, making it look like they'd killed each other. Jamal Stevens had spent months planning not just the murders, but their aftermath. He'd studied crime scenes, researched forensic evidence, and crafted a narrative so compelling that even experienced investigators would find it believable. He positioned Marcus's body to make it look like he'd been the aggressor, placing the knife in his hand and arranging David's body to suggest a struggle. He wrote suicide notes in handwriting he'd been practicing for weeks, notes that spoke of unbearable shame, religious guilt, and a love that couldn't exist in their world. He scattered the threatening letters around the scene, along with printouts of online harassment that painted a picture of two young men driven to desperation by societal hatred. Most importantly, he planted the fabricated audio recording on David's phone, along with text messages he'd created between Marcus and David that seemed to confirm their relationship. When he was finished, the scene told a clear story. Two gay basketball players, facing increasing harassment and threats, had reached a breaking point. Marcus, overcome with rage and shame, had killed David before taking his own life. It was exactly the kind of tragedy that would make headlines, inspire think pieces about tolerance and acceptance, and ensure that no one would look too closely at the alternative explanation. At 3:17 a.m., Jamal called campus security from a payphone outside the gym. "I heard screaming from the basketball facility," he said, disguising his voice. "I think something terrible has happened." Then he returned to his dorm room, showered to remove any trace evidence, and waited for the chaos to begin. Campus security officer Mike Rodriguez arrived at the gymnasium at 3:24 a.m., expecting to find nothing more than a prank call or maybe some students who'd broken in to shoot baskets. Instead, he found the most horrific crime scene in Ridgewater University's history. Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of campus security, vomited twice before he could even call for backup. The amount of blood, the positions of the bodies, the obvious violence that had taken place. It was beyond anything he'd been trained to handle. The first police units arrived within minutes, followed by detectives, crime scene technicians, and eventually the FBI. By dawn, the entire campus was swarming with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator, surveyed the scene with the grim professionalism of someone who'd seen too much death in her career. But even she was shaken by what appeared to have happened. "Jesus Christ," she muttered to her partner as they stood in the locker room doorway. These were just kids. The initial assessment seemed straightforward, if tragic. Two young men, facing enormous pressure and harassment due to their sexual orientation, had reached a breaking point. The evidence all pointed in the same direction: the suicide notes, the planted recording, the history of threats and abuse. "It's a hate crime," Detective Martinez told reporters at the first press conference. These young men were driven to this desperate act by the persecution they faced for who they were. The story exploded across national media within hours. Christian University basketball stars found dead in apparent murder-suicide read the headlines. "Homophobic harassment drives college athletes to tragic end," said another. Cable news channels ran wall-to-wall coverage. Religious leaders called for soul-searching about tolerance and acceptance. LGBTQ rights groups organized vigils and protests. The narrative was so compelling, so perfectly crafted, that no one thought to question whether it might not be true. No one except Coach Bill Richardson. Coach Richardson sat in his office at 6 a.m., staring at the crime scene photos that Detective Martinez had shown him, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew about Marcus Thompson and David Chun. Something was wrong. It wasn't just that Richardson didn't believe his players were gay, though he'd never seen any evidence of a romantic relationship between them. It was everything else about the scene that didn't make sense. Marcus, according to the official theory, had killed David in a fit of rage before taking his own life. But Marcus Thompson was one of the most controlled, disciplined young men Richardson had ever coached. Even under enormous pressure, he'd never shown violent tendencies. David, supposedly driven to desperation by harassment and shame, had allegedly been planning suicide for weeks, according to the notes found at the scene. But David had been making plans for the future just days before his death, talking about summer internships, discussing his senior year goals, expressing excitement about potentially playing professionally overseas. Most troubling of all was the handwriting on the suicide notes. Richardson had seen both players' handwriting countless times on team forms and academic assignments. The notes found at the scene looked similar but not identical, as if someone had been practicing but hadn't quite perfected the forgery. Richardson called Detective Martinez with his concerns, but she was dismissive. "Coach, I understand this is difficult to accept," she said, "but sometimes people hide parts of themselves, even from those closest to them. The evidence is overwhelming." "What evidence?" Richardson pressed. "Rumors and gossip? A recording that could have been faked? Notes that don't look quite right?" "Sir, with all due respect, you're not a trained investigator. This case is closed." But Richardson wasn't ready to let it go. He'd failed to protect Marcus and David in life. He wasn't going to fail them in death. He started his own investigation, quietly reaching out to players, students, and faculty members who'd known the victims. What he discovered would eventually shatter the official narrative and expose the truth about what had really happened in that locker room.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
But it would take 18 months, and by then, the killer would have almost gotten away with the perfect crime. In the days following the murders, Jamal Stevens played the role of grieving teammate to perfection. He was interviewed by every major news outlet, his pain and shock appearing genuine as he spoke about losing his brothers. He organized memorial services on campus, delivered a moving eulogy at their joint funeral, and even started a scholarship fund in their memory. "Marcus and David were the best men I knew," he told CNN's Anderson Cooper. "They didn't deserve the hatred they faced. They didn't deserve to die believing the world was against them." When asked about the rumors regarding their relationship, Jamal was diplomatically supportive. "I don't know if the rumors were true, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they were good people who were being persecuted for who they were or who people thought they were. That persecution killed them." It was a masterful performance that positioned Jamal as both victim and advocate, the loyal friend who'd lost his teammates and was now fighting to ensure their deaths meant something. Behind the scenes, Jamal was careful to cover his tracks. He'd already disposed of the equipment used to create the fake recording. He'd burned his practice sheets for forging their handwriting. He'd even gone to therapy, establishing a paper trail of someone struggling to cope with trauma and loss. To outside observers, Jamal Stevens was a young man handling tragedy with remarkable grace and maturity. His teammates rallied around him. His coaches praised his strength. His professors excused his falling grades as a natural response to grief. The only person who suspected the truth was Coach Richardson, and no one was listening to him. For 18 months, it appeared that Jamal had committed the perfect crime. The case might have remained closed forever if not for a single piece of evidence that Jamal Stevens had overlooked. In November, 17 months after the murders, the FBI's Audio Analysis Unit was conducting a routine review of unsolved cases when they decided to take another look at the recording that had supposedly exposed Marcus and David's relationship. Agent Rebecca Walsh, a specialist in audio forensics, spent 3 weeks dissecting the recording using technology that hadn't been available during the initial investigation. What she found changed everything. "This recording has been heavily edited," she reported to Detective Martinez. "Multiple conversations have been spliced together. Words have been moved around, and entire phrases have been fabricated using voice synthesis software." "Are you sure?" Martinez asked. "Absolutely. This isn't just edited, it's a complete fabrication. Whoever created this is technically sophisticated and had access to hours of source material featuring the victims' voices." Martinez felt sick. If the recording was fake, then the entire foundation of their case was built on a lie. She immediately reopened the investigation, this time focusing not on outside hate groups, but on people who'd had access to Marcus and David's voices over extended periods. The list was short: coaches, teammates, professors, and close friends. At the top of that list was Jamal Stevens. Detective Martinez's second investigation into the deaths of Marcus Thompson and David Chun was methodical and thorough in ways the first had not been. She re-examined every piece of evidence with fresh eyes, this time looking for signs of staging rather than accepting the narrative at face value. She brought in additional forensic experts to analyze the crime scene, the alleged suicide notes, and the physical evidence. What emerged was a very different picture of what had happened that night. The blood spatter patterns didn't match a struggle between Marcus and David. They matched an attack by a third party. The defensive wounds on David's body suggested he'd been fighting someone taller and stronger than Marcus. Most damning of all, DNA evidence found under David's fingernails didn't match Marcus. It matched someone else entirely. When Martinez ran that DNA through the database, she got a hit. Jamal Stevens had provided a DNA sample during the initial investigation, as had all team members, ostensibly to eliminate them as suspects. At the time, no one had bothered to compare his DNA to the evidence found on the victims. Now they had. On February 14th, exactly 18 months after the murders, Detective Martinez obtained a warrant for Jamal Stevens' arrest. Jamal Stevens was working out in the University Fitness Center when Detective Martinez and 4 uniformed officers found him. He was no longer the devastated teammate who'd captured the nation's sympathy. Success and adulation had made him confident, almost cocky. He'd grown comfortable with his fame as the friend who'd survived tragedy. "Jamal Stevens?" Martinez said, approaching him as he finished a set of bench presses. "Yes." He looked up with mild curiosity, not yet recognizing the threat. "You're under arrest for the murders of Marcus Thompson and David Chin." The color drained from Jamal's face as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Around them, other students stopped their workouts to stare in shock. "This is insane," Jamal said, his voice rising in panic. "You already solved this case. Marcus killed David and then himself. Everyone knows that." "Everyone was wrong," Martinez replied coldly. "Your DNA was under David Chen's fingernails. The recording you created to frame them has been proven fake. And we have evidence that you forged their suicide notes." As they led him away in handcuffs, Jamal's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "You don't understand," he shouted to the growing crowd of onlookers. "They took everything from me. They destroyed my life. I had to make them pay." It was the confession Detective Martinez had been waiting 18 months to hear. Jamal Stevens' trial began 8 months later, and with it came the full revelation of the most elaborate murder plot in the state's history. Prosecutors laid out a timeline that spanned nearly a year, from Jamal's initial demotion to the scout team through the careful campaign of psychological warfare he'd waged against his former friends. They presented evidence of his theft of equipment to create the murder weapons. They showed how he'd spent months learning audio editing software to create the fake recording. They demonstrated his practice sessions forging Marcus and David's handwriting, using samples from team documents and class assignments. Most chillingly, they revealed the depth of his deception, how he'd comforted the victims' families at their funerals while knowing he was responsible for their deaths, how he'd given interviews condemning hate crimes while being the perpetrator of the very violence he claimed to oppose. The defense attempted to portray Jamal as a young man driven to a psychological break by the pressure of college athletics and the pain of losing his position on the team. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about the effects of rejection and failure on the developing brain. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The physical evidence, the digital forensics, and Jamal's own recorded confession during his arrest painted a picture of calculated, premeditated murder motivated by jealousy and rage. On the witness stand, Jamal attempted to maintain his innocence, claiming he'd been framed by the same mysterious forces that had supposedly driven Marcus and David to their deaths. But when presented with the forensic evidence, his DNA under David's fingernails, his digital fingerprints on the fake audio file, his practice sheets for forging handwriting, his story fell apart. In a moment of pure narcissistic rage, Jamal finally revealed the truth. "You want to know what happened?" he screamed at the prosecutor. "I'll tell you what happened. They thought they were better than me. They thought they deserved everything while I got nothing. So I gave them what they deserved, exactly what everyone already believed about them. I made their lie into their legacy." The courtroom fell silent as the families of Marcus Thompson and David Chin finally heard the truth about why their sons had died. Not because of who they loved, but because of who had loved to hate them. On March 22nd, exactly 2 years after the murders, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty on multiple counts of evidence tampering. Guilty on charges of fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. Jamal Stevens was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, families in the courtroom had mixed reactions. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back Marcus and David. It couldn't restore their reputations that had been destroyed by lies. It couldn't give their families back the sons they'd lost to one man's jealousy. During the victim impact statements, the pain was overwhelming. Denise Thompson, Marcus's mother, spoke through tears. "My son died twice. Once when this monster killed him, and again when the world believed lies about who he was. Marcus was a good boy, a faithful boy who loved Jesus and wanted to help people. That's how I want him remembered." Jerome Chun, David's father, was more direct. "Jamal Stevens didn't just kill our sons. He tried to kill their memory, their legacy, everything good they stood for. He made the whole world believe a lie about who they were. That's not justice, that's evil." The most powerful statement came from Coach Richardson, who had never stopped fighting for the truth. Marcus Thompson and David Chun were not the men portrayed in the media for 2 years. They were not gay, they were not driven by shame, they were not consumed by self-hatred. They were young men of faith, character, and tremendous potential who were murdered by someone they trusted. Someone who looked like them, shared their struggles, and should have been their brother. Instead, he became their destroyer. Today, the truth finally wins. The revelation that Marcus Thompson and David Chun had been murdered, and that their supposed relationship had been entirely fabricated, sent shockwaves through every community that had rallied around their story. LGBTQ rights groups that had held vigils in their honor felt betrayed and confused. How could they mourn the loss of young men who weren't actually part of their community? How could they process the fact that their tragedy had been built on a lie? Religious communities that had used their deaths as a cautionary tale about the dangers of intolerance found themselves grappling with an even more complex narrative. Marcus and David had been faithful Christians who'd been murdered precisely because of their faith and character, not in spite of it. The media that had covered their story extensively was forced to confront their own role in perpetuating false narratives. How had they been so easily deceived? Why had they accepted Jamal's version of events without sufficient skepticism? Most painfully, the families had to relive their grief while also fighting to restore their sons' true identities. Marcus's girlfriend from high school, Sarah, came forward to share their relationship and his plans to propose after graduation. David's youth pastor spoke about his mentorship of younger students and his dreams of missionary work. Friends and family painted pictures of young men whose lives were defined by their faith, their ambition, and their love for others, not by a fabricated sexual identity. The Ridgewater University campus struggled to process the revelation that one of their own had committed such a heinous crime. How had they missed the signs? How had Jamal's hatred festered undetected for so long? New policies were implemented requiring better mental health monitoring for athletes, more thorough background checks for team interactions, and additional support systems for students facing academic or athletic pressure. But for the people who'd loved Marcus and David, no policy change could restore what had been lost. 5 years after the trial, the true story of Marcus Thompson and David Chun continues to reverberate. The Marcus Thompson Foundation, established by his family, provides scholarships for first-generation college students who demonstrate both academic excellence and community leadership. Recipients are required to complete 100 hours of community service, reflecting Marcus's belief that success comes with responsibility. The David Chun Youth Center in Atlanta serves underprivileged children with academic tutoring, basketball training, and mentorship programs. Jerome Chun, David's father, left his job as a mechanic to run the center full-time, saying, "I can't bring my son back, but I can continue the work he would have done." Coach Richardson, who fought tirelessly for the truth, became a national advocate for thorough investigation practices in cases involving student athletes. He speaks at law enforcement conferences about the dangers of accepting compelling narratives without sufficient evidence. Jamal Stevens remains in prison, where he spent 5 years refusing to show remorse for his actions. In rare interviews, He continues to insist that Marcus and David had it coming because of their success and popularity. Psychologists who've evaluated him describe him as a textbook narcissist with sociopathic tendencies, someone incapable of empathy or genuine remorse. The case has been studied extensively by criminologists as an example of how jealousy and entitlement can transform seemingly normal individuals into calculating killers. It's also cited in discussions about the dangers of confirmation bias in criminal investigations. But perhaps most importantly, the story has become a cautionary tale about the power of lies to destroy lives even after death. Today, Denise Thompson keeps her son's acceptance letter to law school framed next to his Ridgewater diploma. She never got to see him graduate. He was murdered 3 months before commencement, but the university awarded his degree posthumously. People still ask me if I'm angry about the lies that were told about Marcus. She says from her Cleveland home, where Marcus's championship trophies sit alongside family photos. Of course I'm angry, but I'm more sad than angry. Sad that someone's jealousy was so poisonous it could destroy 2 beautiful lives. Sad that the world believed lies instead of looking for the truth. Soonja Chen has never fully recovered from losing David. The language barrier that made it difficult for her to defend her son publicly during the media frenzy still affects her ability to process what happened. In Korea, "We believe the dead watch over the living," she says through a translator. "I hope David knows we fought for his truth. I hope he knows we never believed the lies." Jerome Chun has channeled his grief into action, but the pain remains visible in his eyes. David wanted to help kids who grew up like he did, mixed race, not quite fitting anywhere, using basketball to find their place in the world. Every kid who comes through the center is getting the opportunity David died fighting for. That's how we honor him. Erin Thompson, Marcus's sister, was 16 when her brother was killed. Now 21, she's a senior at Ohio State studying criminal justice. "I want to be a detective," she says. "I want to find the truth for other families like ours. Because lies can destroy people even after they're gone, and someone has to fight for justice."
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Even with Jamal Stevens behind bars and the truth officially established, questions linger about the case that captivated the nation. How did one person's lies become so widely accepted so quickly? What does that say about society's readiness to believe certain narratives about certain types of people? Why did it take 18 months to discover evidence that should have been found immediately? How many other cases have been closed based on compelling stories rather than solid evidence? Most troublingly, what other Jamal Stevens are out there, people whose jealousy and entitlement are slowly poisoning them into something dangerous? Dr. Patricia Williams, a criminologist who studied the case extensively, believes it reveals fundamental flaws in how society processes information about violence. "We want stories that make sense," she explains. "When we hear about a tragedy, we look for narratives that confirm what we already believe about the world." In this case, the story of 2 gay athletes driven to suicide by homophobia was more compelling than the truth, that this was just senseless murder motivated by jealousy. Detective Martinez, who solved the case, carries her own burden of regret. "I failed those boys twice," she admits. First by accepting the obvious narrative instead of digging deeper, then by taking 18 months to find evidence that was right there all along. "They deserved better from me." The media coverage of the case has also been subject to extensive analysis. How did so many reporters and commentators accept Jamal's version of events without sufficient verification? Why was Coach Richardson's skepticism dismissed so easily? These questions matter because they extend far beyond this single case. In an era of social media and instant news cycles, false narratives can spread faster than ever before. The story of Marcus Thompson and David Chun serves as a warning about the dangers of accepting compelling lies over uncomfortable truths. On the 5th anniversary of their deaths, Ridgewater University unveiled a memorial to Marcus Thompson and David Chun on the campus where they lived, learned, and died. The bronze statue shows 2 young men in basketball uniforms, but the inscription focuses not on their athletic achievements but on their character. Marcus Thompson and David Chun, students, athletes, Men of faith murdered March 22, 2019. They lived with integrity, died with honor, and are remembered in truth. The ceremony was attended by hundreds, family members, former teammates, coaches, and community members who'd come to know their real story. Notably absent were many of the activists and media figures who championed their cause when they believed different facts about their deaths. Denise Thompson spoke at the dedication. "This memorial isn't just about my son and David. It's about the importance of truth. It's about remembering that behind every headline, every social media post, every news story, there are real people with real families who deserve to be seen for who they truly were, not who someone else said they were." The memorial also serves another purpose, as a reminder to future students about the dangers of letting jealousy and competition poison relationships that should be based on mutual support. Coach Richardson, now retired, often brings visiting teams to see the memorial. "I tell them," he says, "that Marcus and David died because someone they trusted let jealousy turn into hatred. I tell them to watch out for each other, to speak up when they see problems, and to remember that being teammates means being brothers. Real brothers don't destroy each other." Marcus Thompson would have been 26 years old today. He'd likely be practicing law, fighting for justice for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He might have been married to Sarah, might have had children who would have learned about integrity and faith from their father. David Chun would have been 25. His nonprofit organization would probably be expanding beyond Atlanta, bringing educational opportunities to underserved communities across the country. He'd still be mentoring young people, still showing them that success is possible no matter where you start. Instead, they're frozen in time at 20 and 19 years old, their potential unrealized, their dreams unfulfilled, their families forever incomplete. Jamal Stevens stole more than their lives. He stole their futures, their legacies, and for 18 terrible months, their identities. But truth has a way of surviving lies, even when those lies are compelling and widely believed. Today, Marcus Thompson and David Chun are remembered not as the tragic figures from a manufactured narrative, but as the young men they actually were: faithful, ambitious, kind, and full of potential that was cut short by someone else's hatred. Their real story matters because it reminds us that behind every headline, every viral story, every narrative that seems too perfect to question, there are real people whose truth deserves to be told. Marcus and David couldn't defend themselves against the lies told about them, but their families could, their coach could, and eventually justice could. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not the lies that destroyed two young lives, but the love that fought to restore their truth. Not the hatred that tried to define them, but the faith that sustained them and the people who refused to let them be forgotten. Not the perfect crime that almost succeeded, but the imperfect justice that eventually prevailed. Marcus Thompson and David Chun were murdered by someone they trusted, someone who shared their struggles and should have shared their dreams. But they were not defined by how they died. They were defined by how they lived, and that truth will endure long after their killer is forgotten. This story is dedicated to all the young people who have lost their lives to violence, and to the families who fight to ensure their loved ones are remembered for who they truly were, not who others claimed them to be. Marcus Thompson and David Chun are fictional characters, but their story reflects the real experiences of countless individuals whose lives have been cut short by jealousy, hatred, and violence. If you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of jealousy, anger, or thoughts of violence, please seek help. There are resources available, and there is always another way. The truth matters, justice matters, and every life lost to violence matters.